So why don't we start things off with your 10 days of solitude? Because I think that will set the scene for a lot of people on who you are and what you're all about.
Yeah, absolutely. So in October of this year, so about a month and a half ago, I spent 10 days completely and intensely alone. I live in Los Angeles. I flew to Jackson Hole, Wyoming, spent 3 days in a small cabin in Idaho, the foothills of eastern Idaho, and spent 7 more days in absolutely desolate northern Wyoming, 22 acres, just empty with mountains in the background. And I loved it.
Wow.
And
So
yeah.
take us through it, my man. Take us through. Like, where did you get this idea to do this? Was this something that you've always been thinking about, or were you just like, oh, you know what? I gotta do. Like, where did that come from? Not many people have this thought of I need to spend time alone, and I think it speaks to who you are to break that down for us.
It's something I've been wanting to do for at least a year. So about a year ago, I started a new job. I am the course director for Forte Academy, two flagship online courses, Building a Second Brain, Rite of Passage. And my whole world is student experience for these courses. So I'm constantly jumping on Zoom calls, answering emails, sending emails, helping run classes. So by the time the summer rolled around, early fall, I felt very enriched in my work life, but totally overstimulated in terms of emails and texts and WhatsApps. And sometime in September, I was working on a Saturday and I was just like, man, I need a break. I just need a break from all the noise. And so I pulled up Airbnb. I just dragged the map to the western half of the United States and just started, set a price filter and just started searching for cabins. Went through a bunch, found two that looked just about perfect, and booked up the trip. So that's kind of how it all came about.
So you had no Wi-Fi and you had no screens, and you were just saying to yourself, "Okay, I'm going to make the most out of this experience." What did you learn? What did you uncover in those 10 days of solitude?
Yeah, a few things. I'll start with a little story where I'm driving. I get there at night. This first cabin was near the town of Driggs, Idaho. It's a population of 871 people. And I pull the rental car up and it's completely pitch black. I don't even have service on my phone, but I had read the directions. I was pretty sure I was on the right country road. It's 4,000 West. They don't even have road names out there. They just give them numbers. And so I pull up to this little dark cabin and I kill the engine and I step outside, and the silence was so intense, it was deafening. It was just this absolute silence pounding in from all sides, blanket of stars above my head. And I just took a few deep breaths and I was like, let's go. I'm so glad I did this trip. I had a few doubts, like, is this a weird thing? Like, I told my parents I was doing this 10-day retreat and they couldn't understand, don't you want to do something on your trip? But I knew I wanted to do this. In that first moment of silence, I just confirmed, because it was just like a wash in silence, just confirmed that this is exactly the right thing for me to be doing. So yeah, a few different things I got from it. Number one, just not having any screens, any texts, any emails. Pretty quickly, I'd say by the first sort of mid-morning, early afternoon, I felt this subtle sense of calm creeping in that just seemed to increase throughout the week. And it's just like that feeling when you take a few deep breaths, but on this macro scale, where you're just doing that over the course of, a couple hundred hours. And so that was great. That's one of the first things I expected. Number two was just the joy of not having to worry about clocks, where I would wake up whenever I woke up, whenever the sun kind of rose, and I just had a literal suitcase full of books, and whatever book I most wanted to read, I would read it for as long as I wanted. If I was hungry, I would eat. If I didn't want to eat lunch, I might not eat till 5 p.m. It was just full agency and autonomy to do whatever I wanted and just have that almost cleansing process of the mind and from having that agency and having that space. And so, there's a lot we can talk about. I certainly feel like it increased my inner sense of inner vastness. And that's sort of a vague thing. What does that mean? Well, it's one of those things when you describe it, it doesn't really capture it. You more have to feel it, right? And people can find this different ways. You don't have to go to a cabin in the Western US for 10 days to find this, but it seemed to be a pretty effective way. So it's one path to finding that inner vastness, at least getting a few glimpses of it before returning to normal life.
Have you ever done anything like this before?
I did a miniature version 2 years ago. Right after New Year's, I went to, my parents have a cottage on the Chesapeake Bay. So I went out there and spent 3 days alone. And even that, I really loved. It didn't even feel like enough. Again, I didn't even bring my phone. I just took time off of work, and it was very quiet and very cold. It got dark early, and I read 3 books and took some walks, things like that. But I loved it, but I wanted more. And then just the way work shook out and stuff, I wasn't able to do it again for 2 years. But I had a bit of a history with this, so I knew it was something that would work if I went ahead and did it.
Very cool. And so I'm going to tell you my experience very briefly about doing this.
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
5-day retreat I did by myself, and I never experienced anything like this. And this is when I saw you have this post, I was like, I got to talk to this guy because this is someone that I want to speak to. This is why I created this podcast. And what I found is that after day 4 or in the middle of day 3, I found myself forgetting who I was. Like no one was telling me I'm Danny Miranda. No one was texting me. No one was calling me by my name. So because I was forgetting who I was, it was allowing me to then create any story that I wanted to in the future and allow me to see myself in third person of who I was being and what I could do in the future. So I'm curious if you had a similar experience doing this for 10 days.
Yeah, gosh, that's really interesting. I would something similar where I would go out and take these long walks. So I was mostly reading. I love to read, and I felt like I hadn't had enough time to read just throughout the year with work. So I would get up and read most of the day. I would do some writing, do some journaling, but around 5 p.m. every day, right when the sun is hitting that golden hour, reflecting down on the mountains, hitting the clouds, I'd go out and take a walk. There was a spot in Wyoming had 22-acre property. So I'd take these long loops around the entire property with these incredible views. And it's that same, just similar to what you're describing, where I just felt bigger. Again, there's just sense of vastness and not so tied down to the exact moment, where I could do things like think about the future, think about where I'm going. Ask the big questions. One thing I kept thinking about, it's like sort of just what do you want out of life? And that sounds like such a fundamental question, but you don't often get a chance to really think about that in a big picture way and just sort of grapple with that and ponder that. And I read a book. The first book I read on the trip is Letters to a Young Poet by Rainier Maria Rilke. One of the 2 most incredible, profound books I've ever read. And he talks in that book about needing solitude in order to really ask yourself the big questions in life. One of the things he talks about, he's writing a letter to a young poet, a guy who's 20, trying to be a poet. He says, do you really want to write? Do you feel called to write in your bones? If so, then write. And if not, don't. But that's something that was on my mind because I've begun writing the past year. I've published essays online, but I hadn't been doing as much writing during the year. And that was something I was pondering over. Like, do I feel called to write? And sure enough, certainly felt called on the trip. Went and wrote my first essay after the trip on the experience itself. And that was really a powerful thing for me, just thinking about being creative and, what do I really feel called to do? So I'm curious if you had any of the creative stuff flowing, or is more the just sort of seeing yourself in third person like you talked about. Like, what are the biggest things that came up for you?
The biggest thing that came up was how long the day actually was.
Yeah.
We don't sit there really and think about the sun rising. And you mentioned in your essay, I can't remember the last time I really took in a sunrise.
Oh,
And so I felt that in my bones when you wrote that. And I also was very surprised by, I didn't use clocks either, and I didn't use time. I was surprised by just the way the sun moved. And it was in the middle of the summer, and it was beautiful, and the days were long, and I really felt like, oh, does my body need to sleep now? Does it need to rise now? What do I need? And I think in our modern world, we don't spend a lot of time thinking about how our body feels and how our mind feels, and then doing our actions to that. We are more so taken by notifications, distractions, screens, which can all be very useful, but we're responding to them as opposed to responding to how we innately feel in ourselves. So that's kind of what I took from the trip in general.
100%. The sun was such a big thing for me too. It sounds so basic. The sun, right? It's there every day. But yeah, when you aren't called to be somewhere throughout the day, you just have this lazy time stretching out in front of you. The sun just felt different. You mentioned the sunrise, which I was sitting there watching the sunrise. I was so moved by it, and I was like, "When was the last time I watched a sunrise?" I couldn't even remember the last time I just watched the entire process of the sunrise from dark to light. And another thing, one day I was journaling. It's kind of towards the end of the trip. I was sitting and journaling by a window, and the sun was coming in and falling on my journal. And then I was just watching the sun move, not in the sky, but the way it fell on the table. And I had nothing to do, so I just sat there and sort of mesmerized as this line of light moved across the table. And that struck me too. I don't even know if I can fully articulate why. I think it's something about that innate humanness for however many tens of thousands of years. That's all people did. They didn't have, the iPhone clock telling them what time it was or the Zoom appointment. They just had the suns. There's something there tapping into that deep human nature. I think it sounds like we both felt it, even if you can't, it's hard to express the full extent of it.
You mentioned you feeling a vastness, and I'm curious, have you thought about the ways in which you can take that feeling that you got in the trip and bring it to the modern life? Have you thought about that specific element at all?
I have. A few things come to mind. First of all, I read Walden by Thoreau, naturally, if you're on a trip like that. I had never read Walden before. And one of the lines from Walden, he just says, simplify, simplify, simplify. And that rang through my head when I read it. And then after the trip, was how can I simplify? I got home from the trip. One of the first things I did, I had 2 days off before I had to hop back into the working cycle. And I just went through my room. One of those days where you just dig through your closets and your drawers and your books, and I had 6 full trash bags to Goodwill and gave that away. So that was something I did right after the trip. And then the other thing was simplify, not just in the physical sense, but in terms of my informational inputs. And so, I use Twitter a lot. I like Twitter a lot. I think Twitter is the best social media platform for a lot of reasons. However, I would still spend so much time scrolling Twitter. So I follow about 800 people on Twitter. I muted every single person I follow. So I don't follow anybody right now. I can still go find people's tweets. I have some lists that I make to keep up with certain accounts. But since 2 months ago, I have not followed anybody on Twitter. So every time I have that habit of logging onto the platform, but there's nothing there to read. And so I'm using it to publish my own ideas, but I'm consuming a lot less. So I think that's a huge theme for me coming out of the trip, is just shifting the burden from mostly consuming towards mostly creating, or at least evening those two sides out a lot. I know for myself and a lot of people, I think these days, you're way over indexed on consuming information because there's so much out there, even if it's really good information. It's not just some celebrity news or whatever. It's really rich, great information from these phenomenal Twitter accounts. But even that consumption can be too much. And so balancing out that creating and consumption has been a big thing for me coming out of that experience.
That's super interesting. And I love that tactic because, if you unfollow everyone, people might get offended or, something like that. But you still are signaling to the world, I agree with this person. I still want to follow them. I'm still interested in them. But at the same time, you are saying, I don't want to follow them specifically right now. So it's kind of a cheat code in that sense. And I really like that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and some of the accounts, these anonymous accounts, you'll lose them. You'll forget about them if you unfollow them. And, I don't think I'll do this forever. I might follow some subset of accounts next year or whatever. But for now, it's working really well. So yeah, maybe it is a cheat code.
Yeah, so that is definitely something I wanted to touch on in this conversation, which is like, how can we balance the power of the internet without getting sucked into the trap of the internet? And obviously that's one great way to do that. But I'm curious if you've thought about this further than just, muting a few accounts. Do you have any insights?
Yeah, I've thought about this a lot. I'm sure you have too. So I want to hear your insights as well. But first of all, I'll just say it's really hard. This is not easy. So I view the internet as the single biggest technological leap forward in the history of the species, and it happened in the past 20 years, right? And for
Crazy.
people in our generation in particular, we're right on the fault line where we're just developing our academic and working habits in this totally fluid environment. So it's really difficult. I mean, my freshman year of high school, the iPhone came out and Facebook came out effectively and became widespread. And then my freshman year of college, Instagram and Snapchat came out, right? So we're just hitting these things right when they start. And so you have to acknowledge that first. And, I've wasted thousands of hours on different websites, Facebook, sports blogs, things like that. And you have to sort of forgive yourself because it's really not a fair fight what we're up against. But a couple of things that work for me. First of all, I just try to furiously eliminate the things that I'm exposed to in the first place. Because when you're in that moment of, should I, check the score of the game again, or should I, check the social media app again? You've already kind of lost the fight. I think like that, relying on your willpower alone is not nearly enough. So it's how do you design your digital environment? First of all, think of that as a thing. Your digital environment is a thing that can be designed. And then, okay, how do you design that? So there's certain things you can just do. Like I deleted my Facebook 5 years ago. Haven't had Facebook since. So that's been great. Never had Instagram in the first place, which has been great too, because never had that temptation. There's an opportunity cost with not having those, but to me, it's well worth it to have your precious time back than to be on those. That doesn't work for everybody. It works for me. But then beyond that, if there's some sort of less common things you can do. One thing I love YouTube. We were talking about this before. All these channels I love. I think it's the coolest thing out there right now. But I do not have the willpower to avoid getting sucked down all those suggested videos on your homepage or on the sidebar, right? When you watch a video, here's 17 more that are just as rad that you can click on and spend a couple more hours on. I don't have the willpower. Maybe some people do. I can't say no to that stuff. So I found a Chrome extension. It's called Distraction-Free YouTube. So when I go to youtube.com, I have a search bar and a white screen. And when I search for the video I want and click on it, I have the video player and a blank screen on the side. So none of those recommendations are there. I've probably been doing this for a year, and that's hugely, hugely helpful. So there's all these little tools. There's another one called, I forget, some distraction-free Twitter or something where it mutes those like 5 suggested trending stories. You don't have to see those. So these little things you can do. So I'm maniacal about this. I think it's so important. Time is the most precious thing we have. Internet is like the most powerful tool, but it's got such a downside, and threading that needle is hard, but there's tools that can help you. Because if you're just relying on this, your brain, it's probably not going to be enough, at least for me. So that's a few.
Yeah, I totally agree. And when you think about it, it's really the world's smartest engineers and computer scientists trying to figure out a way to get you to stay on their platform. And obviously they're going to succeed because they're the smartest people ever. And so if you understand and are okay with the fact that they're smarter than you and they're working their hardest to get you to stay on the platform, then you start to take that approach like we both have of trying to find and fight ways against it. Personally, I use all those apps, and I also use freedom.to.
Nice.
I couldn't live without it. It's super helpful. And also the other thing, back to the apps, the newsfeed eradicator for Facebook and the YouTube recommendations. When I installed these, I instantly felt so much clearer in the head. Like when you said simplify, 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 that's how my brain felt a week after using them. And now I can't even go back to the way it was. So I'm grateful that I just installed these, forgot about it, forgot that there was another way, and just continued on life. I think those were great suggestions.
Yeah, no, 100%. There's a lot of tools out there to help you. There's a quote I love that is totally up this alley. It's from an anonymous Twitter account. He says, "Effectiveness begins with elimination. Choose your ignorances as carefully as your interests." I heard that and it hit me like a ton of bricks. It was like, yes, deliberately choose what you're ignorant of as carefully as you choose what you're aware of. And so I think it's not that common to think of it that way, that you're that deliberate. It's like, oh, I should probably try to avoid distractions. It's like, no, as carefully as you choose what Netflix show to watch or what YouTube channel to watch, be that discerning in what you don't pay attention to. The thing is, there's good stuff that you have to say no to. I have an example where again, a lot of YouTube, and I've got my channels I like, and there's this one channel that kept getting recommended. It's called Veritasium. It's this guy who does all this science experiments, and it's really interesting and really popular. He's got like, 5 million subscribers. It's all good stuff. And like a week ago, I was on YouTube and it kept popping up. and it's just not quite aligned with exactly what I'm interested in right now. It's all cool, but I was like, you know what? This is a perfect example. I've got to choose to be ignorant of all these cool Veritasium science videos. Just did a little thing on YouTube. You can say, don't recommend this channel. Maybe I'll watch this stuff one day, but you got to just get that narrow. I'd rather go deep and narrow than just 1,000 miles wide and an inch deep. So,
well, with that, let me ask you, why did you agree to talk on this conversation? Because if you value your time so much, I'm curious about why you are giving me some of it. So, and I appreciate that tremendously, but I'm curious about it.
That's a funny question. It's a good question. I have done a handful of interviews. I think this is maybe my 6th or 7th podcast. Most of mine have been about online education, which I'm really excited about, but this is an opportunity to talk about the way you framed it was just to talk about ideas and the Solitude piece. And I was like, yes, an opportunity to talk about all this cool stuff that I read about and have conversations about, but never share publicly. So that was a big reason. And then, dude, I've seen you on Twitter. I know you're doing cool stuff. So I was like, this will be a great conversation. I know this is the first time we're ever talking, so it's just a good excuse to meet someone cool on Twitter. So yeah, here we are. That's why.
Isn't it interesting that two people that enjoy spending time by themselves like spending time with each other in a different context? Like, I thought that was so fascinating when I realized, like, oh wow, I did that and I want to speak to someone who did that. So yeah, man, yeah. I think you're up to cool stuff too. So that's why I wanted you here.
Cool. Thanks, man.
Awesome. So one of the topics that I love bringing up tweets from people when I do these conversations, because the tweets are awesome, and the tweets are a good way for people to understand your mind and a good way for me to go back in time for your mind. And so one of the tweets that I really enjoyed from you is that 1820 equals world of words. 2020 is the world of images. So let's break this down and talk to me about this, because I don't think I spent a lot of time prior to you bringing this up and me seeing this. I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about this, but once you said it and once it was in my mind, I couldn't get it out. And I think I brought this up to like 10 different people after you tweeted. So really appreciate it for changing my worldview. And I'd love for you to talk about a little bit about it.
100%. I love this point. So you or me or anybody listening to this has seen more images since you woke up this morning than a person in 1820 would have seen in their entire life. Because back then, there were no images. They lived in a world without images. It's very hard to really process what that means because it's so radically different. But I really love looking at history as this mirror reflecting back on ourselves to realize how weird and different we are compared to most time that's ever existed, right? And so there's a really good story to demonstrate this. So in 1825, President James Monroe took a tour around the Northwest Territory of the United States. Just want to see what's going on in Ohio and upstate New York and Kentucky. Okay, so we'd go to these different towns, and we get to the towns on this caravan trip. Took a few months. There wasn't big fanfare. There weren't big crowds greeting him, and it's not because he wasn't a popular president. It's because back then nobody knew what the president of the United States looked like.
How crazy is that? Oh my God!
Because yeah, right. I had the same reaction when I heard this. It's like, but if you think about it, go find a pamphlet or a newspaper from the 1820s, right? It's just sheets of words. They didn't have, I mean, they had portraits and a few wealthy people had painted pictures, but there was no images. You didn't interface with any images day to day the way we do. But people didn't recognize presidents back then by their images, but they recognized them by their words. So they would actually know a president's greatest speeches and ideas rather than knowing what they looked like. They lived in a world of words, right? Largely today, we're moving more and more into living in a world of images. Think about how different that is. I mean, every single person on the planet just about knows who Donald Trump is, right? Or Barack Obama is. But how many people really know beyond into any sort of depth what their actual ideas are in any sense of that phrase? Not that many people, right? We've completely flipped from being this word-driven culture to this image-driven culture. And there's a funny thing about a world of words, right? Where word present, well, first of all, you have to accept the premise that the forms of media matter. Like the way media is what presents the world to you. And if your world is largely presented through words, well, words are very logical. They're very driven by cause and effect. So a world of words presents itself in a very logical, sort of rational way. The thing about images is like if somebody has some words, a speech, an op-ed that you disagree with, you refute that with words, and you have these arguments, these causes and effects. With images, an image just stands for itself. You can't effectively refute an image. And so that's something very different about the media environment we live in today, where it's so image driven, and it's very emotional, and there's absolutely no room for nuance, as we see in our political discourse and on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, with these images going viral. So yeah, it's something I think about a lot. It's really fascinating topic.
How do you think that hurts our culture in whole, in sum? What are we giving up because we are a culture of images instead of a culture of words?
We're giving up nuance. We're giving up nuance in a lot of different ways. I think politics is a very helpful lens, or current events, to look at this through. So in 1858, Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas had the Lincoln-Douglas debates. They're very famous. Those debates, they would go on for 5, 6, 7 hours, right? Lincoln would give his opening remarks for 2 or 3 hours, and then Douglas would respond. One time, Douglas spoke for 3 hours, and Lincoln said, "Mr. Douglas, I'd like to respond, but it's getting late. Everybody must break for supper and then come back and resume." And they did, right? And so the point is, those are people who didn't even necessarily have, a deep education in say, rural Illinois in the 1850s. But because it was this world of words, there was longer attention spans, and then more appreciation for these nuanced arguments that they were getting into. I mean, compare that to the debates we had for the presidential election in 2020. I mean, it's sort of obvious, right? Just the 1 minute, 30-second responses. And then you see this really bear out in a place like Twitter or like Facebook, where somebody shares an image and it goes viral, and that becomes the narrative, whether or not that's necessarily the case. A quick example I can give is during one of the Supreme Court nominations, there was a situation where there was a very well-known activist who's big on the internet, and he went up to the nominee and tried to shake his hand, and then the nominee was taking a break to get some water. They're taking a break, and the nominee just sort of walked past him. And if you go back and look at this image, which went viral and was viewed tens of millions of times, it's the nominee looking at this activist, and the activist has his hand sticking out, and the nominee is like kind of got this expression, and it looks like he totally figuratively slapped him in the face, rejected him. If you see the video, it was like this incidental, like they barely passed for half a second, and then life went on. But that image, gets viewed, say, 25 million times around the world, and becomes this narrative. And there's examples on all sides of the aisle, all across the board. It's not a partisan thing. It's just showing how forms of media totally and completely influence how we view the world, and they're invisible. They're really hard to see, and it's very helpful to look to history, again, to be this mirror to reflect how different the world is today, a world of information abundance, a world of media, compared to how things were. So we're not going to go back to 1858. That's not what I'm saying. Again, it's just helping us to realize how much things have changed, and maybe we can nudge things towards, slightly better discourse, slightly healthier forms of media. It's talking about hard problems. This is a really, really hard problem, but at least step one is you got to be aware of it.
For sure. And my next question, you kind of touched on it in the end of that, but what can we do how can we increase our nuance in society? What can we do? I try to have long form conversations like this podcast to try to extend that, but I'm curious if you have any ideas on what we can do to make our society more nuanced in a world where it is so image driven.
Yeah. I think about this all the time too. I think having this conversation is a tiny microcosm of something that helps, which is focusing on ideas and sort of lifting what you focus on to be things that are enriching and life-giving, and not just the latest thing that went viral that you got a ding about on your phone that you need to, that you just have to hear about, right? That stuff doesn't really matter. So it's a lot of what we talked about. It's limiting your media inputs. I think it's hugely important. But then also it's just, you're at the end of the day, your life is the sum of what you focus on. And if you don't focus on something, in a way, it doesn't exist, at least for you, right? It's you. If you don't check those Twitter trending things, there's a bunch of stuff you wouldn't hear about. You wouldn't know that the Oakland Raiders coach said this. You wouldn't know that Jack Nicklaus's daughter was having a wedding, you wouldn't know that they were casting some movie and there was a Twitter spat over if the casts were done properly or not. But you don't need to know that stuff. That stuff's here one day, gone the next. It's just like the foam on the surface of the ocean. Like you want to go deep. And the thing I've realized though, it's maybe ironic here I'm saying this all to you, but you can't be preachy about it too. Like I don't think that's effective because it has this sense of self-righteousness. Like, hey, like you should do this and you should do that. What I'd rather do, and what I hope I'm doing, is I choose to live this way myself as fully as I can. And then maybe I'm in conversation and gosh, hopefully maybe I'm saying something interesting and then somebody notices or somebody else is saying something interesting. I want to be friends with that person. You sort of get yourself onto this frequency of ideas and just how rich the world is, how abundant the world is, which is way more abundant with the internet. It's an amazing thing, but you elevate yourself to that frequency rather than saying you should do this and this and that. Say, I'm doing this and this and that. It's awesome. And you could check this stuff out too. I think that's the only way to be. I don't think the preachy stuff works.
I totally agree with you about preaching. Preaching never works with anything, whether it be fitness, getting someone to start working out or eating right or do something. It never works. It only works when you are living that and someone says, that's pretty cool. I'd like to live that too. And I think you're doing exactly the right thing by literally living it with 10 days of solitude and, your focus on reading and your focus on the 2-minute Twitter speeches, right? The focus on that. So I want to talk about that because I think that's a really important thing that you started doing. And I love them. I love your 2-minute Twitter speeches. And I think they're such a great addition of nuance into my Twitter feed. So I'd love for you to talk about why you started doing this to begin with. Was it to add more nuance?
Yeah, partly. And just to share ideas I was coming across that I was excited about that I just want to put out in the world and let people know about. So I've always loved public speaking from a young age. I think sometimes you just have that gene in you. And I was doing a lot. I did some in college. I was doing a lot after college. I was in a Toastmasters and doing some public speaking around LA, and it was great. And then obviously over the past year, the global pandemic, there weren't opportunities to go to the Toastmasters meeting. And so limited opportunity to do in-person public speaking. I just thought about it and I was like, well, I've got a Twitter account. This is a place where I can put out some content and see if it sticks with people. And it's a form of public speaking, right? I would have a topic I prepared just like the way I prepared for my speeches in person, have a topic, have the main points I want to hit, run through it 10 or 15 times just so it's a bit smooth and hop on. I just do it for 2 minutes. And I wanted to use Twitter. First of all, that's where I was. And I really wanted to try to use Twitter in a different way. Like I feel like people do something on Twitter and it works. And as soon as something works, it's like becomes very derivative. Like everybody just starts doing that thing that was working. But there's these people who are on Twitter who like forge new ground, fresh territory on Twitter. And I was like, okay, I don't want to just be doing the same old like derivative stuff that everybody else is doing. Not many people use this Twitter video thing. Let's try it. So I did a bunch over the summer and had some modest success. Nothing blew up, but had some people telling me they liked them and just absolutely loved doing it. So I like public speaking. I hope to do more. But I focused on these topics of some of the topics we've been talking about here, media and how the internet is reshaping our sort of external and internal landscapes, things like that.
Yeah, I love that you used the platform of Twitter to create video and to produce video. And I think it was very innovative, and I'm looking forward to seeing you continue to do so. One of the things that you also touched on, first of all, for everyone listening and or watching, Will gave me this incredible list of notes that I've never seen before. No guest has ever prepared. It's like 8 pages of his interests and quotes he likes and all this amazing stuff that I could actually spend an eternity on. But one of the things you mentioned on that was how much you love YouTube. And we got to talk about this because I also love YouTube. And I'm curious why you are so passionate about YouTube and what you think about it going forward.
Yeah. I love YouTube. I mostly watch YouTube at this point. There's just so much on there. And again, you ignore 99.99% of it, but the stuff that's good, that's right in your niche, right up your alley, is so good. There's different ways you can approach this. First of all, I've heard different people talk about how YouTube is the first time where the spoken word can be transmitted at scale, effectively infinitely, right? Like imagine it was 1990 and you had something like you really wanted to say to the world. It was 1990, okay? It's like our parents' generation. What could you do? I mean, you could, write something or whatever. If you wanted to say something, well, you had to get on TV. And for TV, there's these gatekeepers, right? The bosses at ABC and MTV or whatever say, no, not you, not you, not you, not you. It had to be this lowest common denominator. Now, so by the way, the 1990 thing, I mean, you could like record, tape a VHS tape and like mail it to people. Maybe I think that's your best route, right? Nowadays, you grab your phone, you pop up your laptop, record something, nudge your fingers on the keyboard a few times, click send, and your voice and your video, your ideas blanket the globe, every square foot of the globe, 7 times in a second. It's the most remarkable thing that's happened in the past 30 years. And I call it this mundane miracle because everybody knows about YouTube. Oh, you want to see the clip of the game or see the music video, you pull up YouTube. But I think not enough people think of it in this miracle that's sitting in your pocket. So you can get all meta with it, which I like to do. But then in terms of just watching cool stuff, that's a thing too, man. I sent you a list of channels I like. There's so many to talk about, but gosh, you can just find anything you like. But the things I'm interested in, videos about ideas, feeling wonder at the sense of existence, things like that. It's there in spades. So I'm a big fan of YouTube for sure.
I'm curious if you are also amazed by planes, because the thing is, it's like people like me and you who are just amazed at the subtleties of life that we look at and most people take for granted. It's just like, it's incredible to me that we can actually go from one place to another in this vehicle that we made. Like, it blows my mind. And hearing you talk about YouTube is literally what I think every single time I go on a plane. Like, oh my God. Like, guys, are you not freaking out? Like, why are we not taking this for granted? Like, this is the most absurd thing. So what I'm curious about is, where do you think that sense of wonder comes from? And how can we get more people to have that sense of wonder? Because I think it is an incredible place to view the world from.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to answer that, but I got to talk about planes for a second.
Go for it.
Like, what you're describing is exactly how I feel about flying. I'm not just saying that, like, I was just flying. I was just on 2 planes for, combined like 10 hours in the past 3 days. I think about this all the time. There's a great Louis C.K. bit from like 10 years ago. He talks about this. Maybe that's what got me thinking about it in the first place. But my God, I mean, first of all, most people who ever existed never went without, outside 10 or 25 miles of where they live, right? We can just on a whim be like, oh yeah, I want to go to Hawaii tomorrow, and it's $274. Like, let's rock and roll. So that's amazing. But then when you're actually up there, my brain always jumps to these metaphors of you're what is it, 5 times 7? You're 7 miles up in the sky, and just sometimes I think about the fact that the deepest point of the ocean is that deep. So like, you're on the surface of the ocean, there's like that much depth beneath you. Obviously look at like the buildings and what's going on down there. Yeah, man, I think about that constantly. Actually, I've got a story and it fits in with the second part you asked. So if that were totally related to this, basically on a plane one time, I used to work in sales, so I'd fly all over, I was on a lot of planes. I'm on a plane like from Albuquerque back to LA. It's like that perfect, I love flying at about 6 p.m. where the sun is setting. You just get this incredible, if you're going west, you're like going with the sun. So you get this sort of eternal sunset. So we're flying. I'm on the right side of the plane. The sunset's on the left side of the plane. And you look out the window and there's like the most glorious sunset ever seen by mankind, just like erupting out. And I'm like seeing it pour through. And I think of this metaphor of like, my God, like for almost all of human history, figuratively speaking, everyone's sort of just walking along the surface of the earth, like looking up, like, what if we could go fly, both literally and figuratively, right? And then, we get to fly. We're like the one generation who gets to fly, both literally in a plane, and then I'm using figuratively here in the sense of using the internet and doing these conversations and meeting people all over the planet. Like, guys, we get to fly. Like, our parents, figuratively speaking, our grandparents had bicycles, our parents had cars. Like, if every generation was just walking, then we got like bicycles and cars, but like, guys, we're flying. Like, and there was this perfect sort of poetic thing. I actually took a picture because almost the whole entire plane is like looking out the sun, looking out at this beautiful sunset. And the one guy next to me is in the window seat, empty row, and his screen shade is closed. And he's watching some show like on his iPad or whatever. And it was so poetic. And it was just like, this is the thing. So I actually pulled up my laptop in this furious, sort of sprint of like in 30 minutes. I just wrote this essay, which I've never shared with anyone, which was like this whole thing I'm expressing it. We got to fly. It's amazing. And then I ended it something along the lines of like the most glorious sunset is erupting outside the window. You just have to put down your phone and open up the plastic. Whew. So I think about this a lot, and I think the answer is you just be in awe of it yourself. And again, like, don't preach it. Just be like, guys, the view's great. Come check it out. I think it's the only answer. What do you think? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's right. And to your story and to your point, I think about it in the sense of like, if you think about. If you want to give a value of money to every person who's ever lived in all of history, we are billionaires. That's how I think about it. Like, we are the most privileged people. We are the most incredibly blessed that we get these simple things of using the internet and going on a plane. Like, we have so much money. If you want to transfer that, I don't know exactly how to draw the analogy to transfer that to money, but I think you understand what I'm saying. Like, it's incredible, man. And I'm so attracted to people who think like that. And I'm so grateful for you for coming on the podcast, man.
Yeah. No, it's fun talking about this. It's nice to just kind of let loose and talk about this stuff. I think about this stuff a lot. With certain friends, I can have really exciting conversations on these topics. But it's really fun to talk about it and to share it here. There's people out there who I've had this sense myself, but there's other people out there who you may know who are totally onto this. Bunch of different people to recommend, but Jason Silva has this YouTube channel, Shots of Awe. I don't know if you know him, but he'll do these 3 to 5 minute like riffs, but it's like this verbal jazz. He'll be like on top of a big hill with the sun out, and he's just ranting about technology and biology and this and that, and they're really inspiring. It's one of the first things that really got me hooked on YouTube was Jason Silva's Shots of Awe channel. Another guy, Peter Diamandis. If anybody's listening is into this stuff, check out Peter Diamandis. He's a guy who he made a lot in business and then is really doing exciting stuff with that. He has something called the X Prize where he sponsors prizes to spur innovation, where it's like, hey, we need to create a new innovative way to teach people in the developing world, or teach children in the developing world using an iPad, or we need to find this cure for this particular genetic defect that affects some portion of people. And he'll put up like, hey, there's $5 million. Anyone around the world can try to solve this problem, and whoever solves it, you get the 5 million. And it's a brilliant sort of model. And beyond that, he has a whole community called Abundance Digital, and he's written several books just about how exciting the future is, right? And I think it's important to say in the context of this conversation, there are totally downsides to the internet. There's totally suffering in the world, and it's not to be naive of that. It's to be fair aware of that, and to don't ignore that entirely, and focus on that. And how can you serve others through your work and 80,000 hours, effective altruism, things like that. But I think it's about, again, choosing what you focus on. You become what you behold. And I think most people are really familiar with, there's like 3 things about the internet. Most people are really familiar with 2 of them. One is the bad things, right? Internet can be used to plan terrorist attacks and take your pick of all the ways the internet can be a really bad place, the way it affects politics, all this, things. And people are very familiar with the mundane things of the internet. Oh, I wasted time on Instagram again. Oh, my crazy aunt is posting something on Facebook again. Everybody knows those, but I don't think we spend enough time talking about this mundane miracle. We're flying, and every other generation could have just imagined. Even the conversation we're having 500 miles away was unthinkable, right? By video, 15 years ago, this was a dream, right? And here we are. It's the most mundane thing. So you become what you behold. So why not take more time to behold this third dimension of the internet, the sort of glorious, amazing version of the internet. And it's a bit earnest to do this, but I think it's okay to dare to be a bit earnest. Like, if you're earnest, you open yourself up to irony and criticism, fine. It's like, we need more people to be earnest and just wonder at the miracle of everything, and then internet in particular.
Oh man, so much to chew on with that. I mean, it is it is just incredible. Like it is the craziest thing. But I love how you said the mundane miracle. Like it is so true. Like it is really that, and we are so grateful for that. But when we focus and shift our attention to the downsides of it, how do we be happy with the fact that we are living a miracle, and also what does that, do we have any obligation to, because we are aware of so much, like how do we deal with all of the world's problems, Will? Like
No.
tell us.
All right, we got 20 minutes. We're gonna figure it out right here. Yeah, it's really tough. I think I can maybe answer this question in the context of what I do for work a bit. I think that might help. But I think there's some, because okay, you can get very sort of starry-eyed talking about all this. I love doing that. I've sort of read a bit about how in the 90s, like early to mid, even late 90s, there was a lot of this, like folks, especially in the Bay Area, Kevin Kelly, Timothy O'Leary, Stuart Brand, like all these, they're called sort of these techno-utopists, I think that's a word, right? Where they viewed the internet as this information superhighway that was just going to be all glorious and good. Actually, okay, a friend of mine is in this program at Stanford. It studies the intersection of AI and consciousness. It's called Symbols and Systems. So Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn, took this program in, I guess, late 80s, early 90s. And my friend has spoken to Reid and his classmates. They came back and did a talk. So what do we think of when we think of LinkedIn? It's like, a lot of it's the worst of the internet. It's just this crass networking, and it's just sort of soulless and gross, and everybody's just sharing 9 hacks and 6 tips, right? Nobody's super jazzed about LinkedIn. When LinkedIn was founded, Reid Hoffman viewed it as the thing that was going to connect humanity and make our differences dissolve and lift us all up to this next sort of order global civilization. Regardless of the specifics, he viewed it as this tool to unite mankind, and it sort of got bastardized into this, networking pile of junk that it is now. There's a few good things on LinkedIn, but you get the point, right? It was sort of tainted by the institutions, both social institutions that we have, and then sort of the ways we think about the world, status games, and zero-sum way we look at the world. Okay, but that was the vision. So there's this techno-utopia visions. And then now it's just very commonplace to totally criticize those and be like, well, the internet wasn't always cracked up to be. There's all these bad things about it. But again, I think actually you can get starry-eyed, and then you can get practical about specific ways to use it for good. So my job is I'm course director and director of student experience for Rite of Passage, one of the 2 flagship courses we have at Forte Academy. And Rite of Passage, the whole premise is you come into the class, it's 5 weeks. Day 1, you build a personal website, you build an email newsletter, and then you write about what you are most interested in. And for some people, they're trying to further their career, use it for sort of networking, and that's great. A lot of people have a lot of success with that. But other people just want to jam on ideas and talk about the things that make them feel most alive and the unique blend of things they're most excited about, right? And so those people come to Rite of Passage, and in 5 weeks, they have 5 articles and an email newsletter to distribute those articles. And you start humbly, right? You just text 20 friends and family members, say, hey, I'm doing some writing online, I want to send it to you. But if you stick with it over time, there's this metaphor where you are like a radio tower broadcasting your frequency out into the world. And most people aren't tuned to your frequency, so they're going to let it go right by. But every time you hit publish, your ideas blanket the globe 7 times in a second. So some people are going to catch your frequency, and they're tuned to your frequency. So this is pretty good. They go to your website. The website is like a magnet that draws those people back in, right? And so it's this, I view the sense of mission working, on this course and getting people to, when you're writing and you have to publish something every week, well, you're going to have this forcing function to consume higher quality content. You're not going to be reading about the latest celebrity news on Twitter. You're going to be thinking about those topics and ideas that make you feel most alive, most excited. And then you broadcast that out into the world. And we're not going to fix the world's problems with this, but you can nudge. The internet is this agnostic tool, and you can nudge it just ever so slightly towards the good. I think there's something really compelling about that. Something I find it beautiful when you see people writing these articles and somebody goes semi-viral and gets a bunch of hits, and they're just excited to do more. So that's maybe one. It can be through the class, it can be writing, without the class. You don't have to take the class, obviously, but it's just more people putting their unique flavor, unique frequency out into the world.
Yeah, and I love what you said because it touches on something we were talking about before, which is adding more nuance to the world. And if enough people start writing, start putting their nuance into what's going on, that's going to attract people to start thinking about things more deeply and thoroughly. So you gave me the perfect opportunity to talk about Rite of Passage and your work, which I'm going to take as the interviewer for this conversation. There's an incredible community that Rite of Passage has created online. And you are at the forefront, it seems, from my perspective, of creating that community. What do you think has made Rite of Passage such an incredible community, and how can that be replicated in other areas or in general?
Yeah, it's a group of people from all over the world. We've had people from more than 50 countries take the course, and people from all over the world hop on Zoom and just talk about ideas, talk about writing, talk about creative expression. I do think that most people generally today, there's so much good stuff to consume out there, right? It's not all bad. There's amazing Netflix shows and, again, the YouTube, music, whatever it may be. But we're so oriented towards consumption. And it's a group of people who say, you know what, I'm consuming a lot of great stuff. I want to create something. I want to actually put something out into the world, risk being criticized, or more importantly, risk what we call the crickets of indifference, was when you publish something and nobody cares. That hurts. That stings. But it's a special group because it's people who are a bit earnest. Everyone's curious. Like, you don't end up in this class where you pay this money to be, basically assigned essays for 5 weeks. You don't end up in a place like that by accident. Everybody there's there for very sort of deliberate reason. And it starts with the guy who founded it, a guy named David Perel, who, if you're on Twitter, you may have seen his account, but he has been writing online for several years now and has really built up a really diverse mix of articles that he's written, all sorts of different topics. So he sort of just started doing this and then realized it was cool and made this class to see if you could help other people to experience the same benefits of the internet, the tremendous leverage it gives you to just put your ideas out into the world. And they're there forever, by the way. They blanket the globe for seven times a second forever, for as long as the internet exists. So people can always find your stuff later on too. So to sum it all up, it starts, David created it in the first place, and then the people that are attracted to do this type of work are just a really interesting, curious bunch. They all become friends with each other, and we're just thrilled about it.
I love how you got the job working. You took the class. From my experience, you took the class and then emailed David with some suggestions, and then he took that and he was like, "Oh, dude, these are amazing suggestions. Let me hire you," or something along those lines. I don't know if that's how it went, but is that accurate?
Yeah, that's about it. I took the class, first ever cohort. I remember the first day. This was in 2019. Zoom wasn't too big back then. The first time I took the class, I didn't know what was going on. It was after work. I put in the code, opened up this Zoom room, and boom, there's 75 faces of people from all over who were just all kind of interested in ideas and super into this stuff. So that was a really cool moment, that first moment. But yeah, I took the class twice that year. Did well with it, made a website, got some articles published, and the class was good. But I emailed David at the end of the second cohort and said, "Hey, I like the class a lot. Here's a couple ways I think it could be better." Jumped on a call. He said, "Hey, I need someone to help me out with this stuff. Do you want to do it?" I said, "Sure." So I worked my 9 to 5, and then nights and weekends I worked hard on delivering a cohort of Rite of Passage, and that went well. And then I got hired by Tiago and David to work on Rite of Passage and building a second brain full time starting in January of this year.
So incredible. And it also leads me to ask, okay, so you worked for this company originally when you started your career that had 200,000 employees, and now you have a single-digit company where you're just working with a few people. What have you learned about the differences between those two dichotomies?
Yeah, very different. Being at a massive company and a 3-person company. Now we're at 6. So I guess the first thing I'll say, if there's some lessons to be learned from working at a big company. Like, I don't think it's all bad. You can definitely learn things from that. First of all, I met amazing people. Met my girlfriend at this company. Oracle is the company. It's a big tech company. So started with them. And a couple of things I learned. So number one, I was selling Oracle software. So 200,000 person company. And my only company I sold to was AIG, which is a 50,000 person company. So I felt like this tiny little individual between these massive crushing bureaucracies. And you learn, I don't think you can really appreciate what a bureaucracy is or how mind-numbing bureaucracy is until you're in the thick of it. I mean, maybe if you work, for your country's government, you've gotten more of a sense of this, but that's pretty bureaucratic, that many employees and things. So you realize that I learned in a big company, there's always the reason, right, in quotes, and then the actual reason stuff happens. And it took me a couple of years where at first I was young and naive, and we get some directive about the latest software we're supposed to sell and just took it totally at face value. And then I learned over time from talking to older folks in the company, you have to learn to read between the lines of why things are actually being done, and that can help you navigate. The Venkatesh Rao has a book called The Gervais Principle. It's fantastic, talking about corporate culture in large companies. And then third thing I realized is creativity really stands out. So if you're in a big company, you can do little creative things that aren't that common, right? You kind of, for example, I did a newsletter for my sales development rep organization that was sort of funny and got passed around a bunch, helped run some contests, just little things that a lot of people aren't willing to step, they toe the line all the way, aren't willing to step out and try some new stuff. But then, going from a massive company to a small company, I think you just go from having like a really narrow pool where you're just swimming one lap back and forth to like you're out in the ocean, right? I feel like it's the Swiss Army knife of, okay, with Dave and Tiago, I was officially doing student experience and operations, but then also helping them with marketing, helping do sales, doing graphic design, setting up websites, start running calls and public speaking, like all these things. And so it's just a lot of fun to do that. You build a lot of self-confidence when, you're like, okay, there's a cohort of 200 people and, myself, a couple of people I work with, the entire responsibility for doing this well is on our shoulders. Like if I miss a week of work at Oracle, maybe get an unpleasant email from my manager. If I miss a week of work at Rite of Passage, like 200 people will not have a course. And so that burden is really heavy. But then when it goes well, you have this self-confidence that I think is harder to get at a lower level, large company, to have that much responsibility and then to do well. You're like, wow, I'm capable. Maybe I can do some stuff here. So I think that was sort of the two sides of the coin, if you will. I think it's more fun to work at a small company, but again, it's not the worst thing in the world to work at a big company. You just learn different types of lessons. I think it's generally good to move towards a smaller company if you can. But with anything, there's trade-offs on both sides.
It sounds like you're really embodying the term entrepreneurial or entrepreneur, even though technically you're not starting your own company. I use that in the sense of like getting gritty, doing things, going everywhere. And it seems like that's exactly what you're doing.
Yeah. It's a big part of it, right? It's what's fun about the small company is that if you have an idea for something, you just do it. Maybe I have to ask one person like, Hey, David, hey, Tiago, what if we do this? One of the things we did, I wanted to really go overboard and give people a good experience. I was like, what if I just did a call with every new student? And they're like, you want to spend time on that? I was like, yeah, I like talking to people. So I just did. And, we've got big enough now they're in groups, but, you can just think of stuff and it's really rewarding to like, say, okay, you pop into a Google Doc, you plan the mentor program, you just kind of write down some words and then it becomes this thing in the world. It's very gratifying to have that much autonomy. And, I'm the first employee. I get a big sense of that. I'm sure, people who founded their own companies, that's the ultimate thing, right? You just created something out of the infinite void of the universe. You just created something that only exists because of you. So I'm just kind of getting it, I'm getting a lot of sense of it, but I think found your own company, it's the ultimate version of this. So yeah, there's something, you trade off because again, you work really long hours sometimes, and sometimes you have to go away to a cabin to recover, but it's a worthwhile trade-off in my eyes.
You're talking about the feeling that I get from creating this podcast, the feeling that I get from writing online of something that was just in my head, like this idea, oh, I should talk to people. Oh, I should create that. And then it becomes real. And then all of a sudden I'm talking to you and, that is absurd to me. And I'm so grateful for that experience. And it sounds like working in a small company is very similar to writing online and creating anything in that sense.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I mean, I think it's that it's just you just go do it. It's exciting. I mean, I'm curious. Did you have doubts like when you must have had some, or like what was the when you first started this, right? It's that first step of 0 to 1, right? Now it's all 1 to N. That first 0 to 1 step, what was that like? What was going through your mind? Yeah, I haven't done that particular thing myself, so I'm curious what you thought of it.
Yeah, so I created this podcast because I put on Twitter, hey, does anyone want to talk on the phone? And I started having calls with people, just random people who follow me, and I was like, these are amazing. I'm learning so much. They're the person on the other end saying, this is the best phone call of my life. Holy shit, this is incredible. And then I'm saying to myself, oh my God, why aren't these recorded? You
Yeah.
know, like I would have had this conversation with you if it wasn't recorded, just because we align interests, and so I'm thinking to myself, oh, this is a no-brainer. This is what I have to do. And so I just started moving quick, because if you start moving quick, you don't think about the challenge,
Yes.
the background of this, and the image of the podcast is a guy looking at a mountain. And it's my personal belief that whenever we start a new project, whenever we begin a new day, we are facing this mountain. And so I just started going and started climbing as fast as I could, started figuring out, how do I get an intro done? How do I get cover art done? How do I do all these things? I didn't know. You just start asking people, and you start going and going. And within a month it was launched, and within 4 months I'm starting talking to you. So
Yeah.
yeah, that was the journey
Amazing.
in
Amazing.
a nutshell.
It sounds like you nailed it. Just that taking action. I think when you do have that self-doubt, just doing something, like waking up and doing something, sort of makes the self-doubt go away, right? It's your escape from self-doubt. So yeah, that's really cool. That's really cool.
Yeah. And you know what also is, like, I had completed this program called 75 Hard. Have you heard of it?
No, I don't think so.
It's just like you do 2 workouts a day and a bunch of other stuff to help you. You do that for 75 days. And by doing this and completing this challenge, it made me realize how capable I was.
Yeah.
Before doing this challenge, I would have a lot of self-doubt. Can I do this? Should I start this? This isn't the project for me. Or I'd start something, and then I would be like, oh, like I don't know if I want to do this. But after doing this program, I knew I'd completed 75 days of doing something difficult. I knew I was capable, and so that stuff was completely gone. So
Nice.
I don't know if
Very cool.
yeah.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool. Wow. You know what? That kind of reminds me of something. I wanted to bring this up because for a while ago on Twitter, you were putting out this, I think it was like 5 things per day that you're doing. Did I have that right? It was like a list. Okay. And
Yeah.
I can't remember what yours were. I think one of yours was like drink a gallon of water. So was it like working out? Like what was your things? I remember seeing
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, 75 Hard is
Oh, that was the
you
same
work
thing.
yeah, you work out twice a day. You
Okay.
drink a gallon of water. You read 10 pages of a nonfiction or self-help book. You
Amazing.
follow a diet, and you take a picture of yourself every day. And
Got
so you
it.
do that for 75 days, no breaks. If you stop one day, you have to go back to one.
Oh, man.
Like, so
That's
you
cool.
it's strict. No alcohol, no nothing. So
That's
yeah,
very.
it's
I
legit.
never asked the same things. Yeah, no, that's really cool. So I bring that up because at some point I saw you tweeting about like, I worked out, did the read the 10 pages, did the this, did the that, and I knew it was this taking action thing, and it was cool because there's this. I like quotes. There's this quote. Which one is it? Shane Parrish says, "Clarity through action, not thought." Like if you're lost in a web of thoughts, just take action that day. That goes away. Okay. So I see this. This was like early last month. So maybe 6 weeks ago, and I was like, okay, I want to back from the trip. I want to, get good habits going again. So I just wrote down 5 things I do every day, and I started doing them. And for like 2 weeks, it went really well. And then I had a buddy of mine who was feeling a bit stuck. One of my good friends from college, we had a conversation, and I was like, hey, I'm doing this thing where I just do these 5 things every day, right? Like I write, I exercise, I journal, I publish something, right? So these, and then I sit and be still for 10 minutes. Those 5 things. And I told him about it. I was like, what you need to do, if you want, is do your 5 things. And so we brainstormed right there, and his are similar to mine. They're a bit different. He's a musician, so he's creating music. He started doing his 5 things, and we checked in every day. We texted every day, and it helped me, and it helped him. So he's, talking to me after a week, like, this is so great. I'm finally making progress. I felt stuck for a while. he has dinner with his cousin who's trying to be an actress in LA, and she's had some success, but then with COVID, she's struggling, and he shares it with her, right? And then she starts doing it, and then he tells his mom about it, and she starts. So it's like this domino effect. So I was thinking of it from the ripple from what I do out, but I remembered I saw your thing on Twitter, so it's originally from that. So it's like when you do something, it ripples out. So like my best friend's like cousin and her mom and his mom, they're all doing this thing now. So it's pretty cool, man. So anyways, yeah, taking action, that's where it's at.
Holy smokes. It's crazy because you really don't know. Thank you for sharing that. You don't know what happens when you put something out. You don't know the effect it has. Yeah. And something that I like to think about a lot is a study that was done that showed if you suddenly become happy, if Will Mannon suddenly becomes happy, your friend's friend, up to 3 people, has a 10% chance of becoming happier. Same thing with you smoking or becoming obese. These hold true. And that thought always rings in my head when I think about things, and I think about this podcast, and you think like you're just one person. Who cares? Everything you do, everyone's watching. And even if everyone's not watching, in that moment, you are having an effect on someone else. And I think that's so important to internalize and to understand that our actions really do matter in such a big way.
Yeah, 100%. And even just in just a given day or just a couple of weeks, right? This is just the seed of something. It's the start of something, this 5 habits thing, but it's, who knows the effect it'll have on those people. And then maybe they'll tell people about it. Right. It's just, yeah. So I totally agree with you, man. That's a cool, I have to check that out. Yeah.
Yeah. What were your 5 habits? What were they?
Yeah. It's write for 30 minutes every day. The only reason I wrote that Solitude piece, I hadn't written in a while, is because I just wrote every day for 30 minutes. So write every day. Sit still for 10 minutes. A guy named Sam Harris has an app that's pretty cool. I've been trying that out. Exercise. So for me, at first I was just a 1.5 mile run, and now I do 5 sets of a certain number of push-ups. It goes up, each week. So that's exercise for me. Journal, not even a time limit, just have to write in my journal every day, and then publish something every day. So I started in Twitter, sending out some articles and stuff. So those 5 things, and none of them are world changers, when you really zoom in on them. They're just pretty modest things, but it's the consistency, right? It's what you are, what you do every day. And stuff compounds faster than we think, right? You just got to get yourself on those compounding loops. Somebody said, don't be afraid of slow progress, be afraid of no progress. So as long as you're just doing something, that can compound. 0 doesn't compound. So yeah, it's a lot of your worries go away when you just bring it back to like, today, what am I doing?
How do you track those? Is it just a sheet of paper? Do you have a Excel sheet? What is the tracking mechanism so people can really get an idea?
I thought I had it here on this desk, but it's just a 3x5 index card every day. Write down those 5 things, and then cross them off one by one. I write best ball pen in the world, G05, whatever. I love these things. I write this every day, and I cross it out with a Sharpie. And that sounds so silly, but for a while I was like tracking on the sticky notes on the Mac, and that doesn't work. It's that satisfaction of you write it and then you get that Sharpie and you cross it out, and it's like I did my 5. Sounds silly, but that works for me. Find what works for you. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it's silly at all, and I think that is actually so important and gets overlooked. Is how you track something can sometimes be if you follow through with it, and if you have that index card and the index card works for you and you enjoy that crossing off with the Sharpie, that is the game. Like, you are winning if you are enjoying that process. So thank you for sharing, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so we've had a hell of a conversation. Is there anything else you would like to mention before we end this? I know there's a lot going on in that brain, and I know we stirred some juices. So if you would like anything to say anything before we wrap it up, I would love to.
With a question on a topic I really enjoy. So you have a quote on whatever you call that picture at the top of your Twitter account. It's an Emerson quote. I'm actually forgetting which quote it is now, but you have Emerson up there. And like, why, or like, are you a fan of Emerson? Just curious how you ended up choosing that.
That's a great question. I have not read any Emerson, so I'm
That's all good. Yeah.
An absolute fraud from that perspective. But it hit me somewhere because I realized that everything that I was creating was because of my energy. And the quote is, the world belongs to the energetic.
Yes.
And I realized that everything I was doing was because I was high energy, because I was matching the energetic frequency of someone, and I was living a life of energy. So, and I was going in the right direction in life. And I realized that there were other periods in my life when I was going the wrong direction. So that's why the world belongs to the energetic is the quote on my Twitter header.
Yeah, it's such a good quote. Very cool. I just bring it up because Emerson is, one of the writers who I found him at the end of college, and like I didn't know words could be so powerful till I read Emerson. So if anybody's listening to this and is vibing with the conversation, sort of on this frequency that we're talking at, I can't recommend anything more highly than to read an essay called Self-Reliance by Ralph Waldo Emerson. Self-reliance. So in college, I would try to get all motivated. I was struggling, in school and this and that. And I would watch a lot of TED Talks and YouTube videos. Those, you ever see that YouTube video? It's like the one where the guy goes into the ocean. He's like, "You're struggling to come up for air. Like, want success as bad as you want to breathe in that moment." And I'd like watch these and be like, "Let's go." I read this essay in a class, my final year of college, and I'm like a third of the way through, and I'm so struck by it. I write in the margins, this is so much more powerful than any TED Talk, any YouTube video, right? That stuff's all derivative. This is the source. Ralph Emerson, the American Transcendentalist, Thoreau's up there, Walt Whitman, a few others. And it's hard to really sum up the essence. I think the biggest thing, it just takes your typical cliches of like, you're unique and you're an individual, and it just turbocharges those. What are some lines? He says, "The power in you is new in nature, and none but you knows what you can do until you have tried." That's one that I just love, right? There's that. There's so it's about like this genius that every person has inside themselves, and this call to not conform. He says something like, reject the squalid conformity of our times. And he says, like, it's easy to be a man of the world. It's easy to be a man for yourself when you're by yourself. But the rare man is the one who, in the company of others, keeps the sweet independence of solitude. So I really love that one. And then the final line, and there's like 20 I could choose from Self-Reliance. There's so much good stuff in there. But the final one that I really like is, "Not for no reason, one face, one idea, one fact makes much impression on one man and another none." So what better sentiment for this age of abundant information, where again, we have the world's information at our fingertips, any YouTube channel, any blog, any book you want to find on Amazon, you can find any information. The only bottleneck is between your ears. And so there's certain things that just resonate with you. I mean, we've talked about, clearly we found some overlapping ones here in this conversation, but there's, when I'm at a wedding, I only dance to the songs I like. If there's a bad song, I sit down. And there's sort of a metaphor there where if there's a book I like, an idea I like it, and I go all out for it. If I don't, you set it aside, and that's fine. But when you find those things that resonate with you, do something about it, create something, share it with others, because then you'll get other people onto your frequency. What we've been talking about this whole call. So bring people up on your frequency by finding the things that make a large impression on you, because that matters. What resonates with you matters.
You are a beautiful orator, Will. Incredible. Where can people find you? And I'm sure they do after this conversation. Where can people find you on the internet?
Appreciate it. We got a website and a Twitter account. So will-mannon, mannon.com. That's where I just publish my writing. Got a newsletter called Future Glance on there. And my Twitter is will_Mannon. So that's where I'm at.
Awesome. Thank you for joining me, man. It's been absolutely incredible.
This was so great. Yeah. Glad we recorded this conversation. It's a lot of fun talking about this stuff, and we'll have to talk more in the future. Thanks, Danny.